Welcome to the HerHealth podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk, where we empower women and girls to take charge of their health and well-being. Join us as we shine a spotlight on issues affecting women and girls' health and explore ways to create positive change. Get ready to be inspired and empowered as we discuss health, advocacy, and empowerment for women and girls at risk. Please be advised that this podcast may cover sensitive topics such as gendered violence. We understand that these discussions can be difficult to listen to. If you feel uncomfortable or need support, we encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Consider exploring our other podcasts if these topics are triggering for you. Resources can be found in the description.
Welcome back to the Her Health podcast. I'm your host, Alexandra Lazochek, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's episode is one I've been thinking about for a while because the topic is moving faster than most of us can keep up, and the people that are most affected are often the last ones to get information that's much needed. So we're going to talk about sextortion and AI-generated deep nude images, two of the fastest growing online harms targeting young people in Canada right now. And my guest today has spent over a decade at the forefront of this research. So Dr. Caitlin Mendez is a sociology professor at Western University, where she also holds the Canada Research Chair in Inequality and Gender. She also leads the DIY Digital Safety Project, which has gathered information from over 2,000 Canadian teens about their experiences of online harm. Caitlin has been doing this work for over a decade and is passionate about taking this knowledge to make digital spaces safer for everyone. So thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. You've been studying about technology and the gender intersect for over a decade, starting with feminist news coverage and slut walk through over your three major books, and now arriving at sextortion and AI generated images. How did your research take you here?
Oh, well, by accident. If you'd asked me when I started my PhD 20 years ago if I would ever be studying, this topic, I would have definitely said no. It really kind of started with the hope. I'm a very optimistic person, and what actually really inspired me kind of in this area was I was really curious about feminist use of digital technologies for activism. So that's, when I first heard about slut walks. So this is this anti-rape movement, started in Toronto. It was very grassroots. It ended up spreading all around the world. And I was really fascinated by the activist use of social media, mostly Facebook and Twitter, to spread messages against rape culture, to organize, to, share information. And I thought that was really amazing. And as part of that research, I interviewed around 20 different organizers from around the world. And, I was asking them about their use of technology, and they slowly started telling me about these weird interactions that they were getting from other people. Again, at the time when I was doing this research around 2011, they didn't even have language for trolling. We didn't have language around tech facilitated violence. So they would just tell me about these weird comments or negative comments that I started asking more and more of them about. And so I started hearing about the kind of like violence and the abuse and the harassment that they were subjected to. And that's something that always stayed at the back of my mind. But again, I was really interested in the hope. So, interested in not just Slut Walk, but a range of other like feminist initiatives that have used social media, kind of culminating with Me Too. Like, how are people disclosing these experiences of sexual violence via social media? What are they getting out of it? There was a lot of like really positive stories there. But again, I kept coming back to the abuse and the harassment. And especially when it comes to feminist activists, a lot of them were young. A lot of them were teenagers when they were engaging in this activism. And so they came to a certain point where it was like, I can't ignore this anymore. And so that kind of got me broadly interested in tech facilitated violence. And again, I was doing this research around the time when smartphones were becoming popular, when phones had cameras. So again, this idea of how like non-consensual intimate image sharing became widely popular. And I'm just a very curious person. So I think I just came to it by being like, well, let me talk to the people and let them tell me what they're experiencing. And so, again, when it comes to deep nudes, when it comes to sextortion and catfishing, this isn't me coming up with the big idea on my own. This is me talking to people and them telling me that these are common experiences.
Definitely. Thank you so much for diving into your past work and then what's going on today. I think a lot of people that grew up in that digital age, it was so much easier to get that language of trolling and that tech facilitated violence that you're mentioning about. But I can only imagine how interesting and fascinating it was to hear very common stories through different people, but not having the language to say what it is. So thank you so much for really diving into that. I think that's so fascinating to hear more about.
Can I just add, even on that, because
Yeah,
even things that we often call bullying, oh, now we actually have more precise language. That's not bullying, that's image-based sexual abuse, or that's grooming, or that's sextortion. But often we have all of these practices that just kind of get lumped together, and something like bullying, and I'm not saying bullying is like a word we should get rid of, but that when you have someone creating a deep fake nude image of you and passing it around to your friends and family, that's not bullying. That is, a form of tech facilitated sexual violence. And I think having the language to like identify that is really important because when it's bullying, oh, well, that's something like maybe it's not that serious. Maybe I just need to grow a thicker skin. Maybe there's no legal recourse or emotional recourse that I should access. So even having that language, I think, can help people reframe their experience as something that is serious, that I maybe violates my rights, and that, that I'm not blamed, I shouldn't be blamed for as well.
definitely. If we can get more specific, I think that's more empowering for everyone when if they unfortunately do deal with something that is an unconsensual sharing of their photos or having some type of technical facilitated sexual violence. So thank you so much for diving into that a little bit more. I'm really curious about your DIY, the Digital Safety Project. You surveyed about over 2,000 Canadian teens, and I'm curious of what the numbers told you. Did anything really surprise you doing that survey?
Yeah, so we've done two nationally representative surveys. So both of them have had about 1,000 teenagers each. So the first one was explicitly on tech facilitated sexual violence. So we were interested in the non-consensual intimate image sharing. We were interested in the extortion, in the catfishing, in the different forms of like rape threats, sexual harassment. And I mean, quite frankly, because I've been in this space for a while, I wasn't surprised by what we found. It was pretty on par with what other studies have found. So I think it was about like 1 in 3 Canadian teens have experienced this, but at least half of them knew someone who had experienced tech facilitated violence. We know that sexual and gender minorities have higher rates for most of these kinds of harms. Again, sextortion is the one that we're really seeing a growth with boys and young men, and being catfish. So there were many stories of young boys and men who weren't sextorted, but there were attempts to sextort them. So they knew that someone was like trying something. So but that study was also still important because I think it's important as Canadian legislators and policymakers are coming up with, these kinds of interventions for the Canadian context, that we have Canadian data, that we're not just relying on what's going on in the UK or the US or other countries. So we have this Canadian specific data to kind of show policymakers that this is an important issue in Canada, and we need to take it seriously. The most recent study that we did was actually another survey of 1,000 Canadian teens, and that was explicitly on their exposure to authentic gore, violence, and extremist content. So when I say authentic, I'm
Mm.
not talking about AI generated. I'm not talking about fictional content, animations. This is content that is real. Sorry, like it's actual violence. And so we very shockingly found 85% of Canadian teens have seen at least one form of this authentic gore, violence, or extremist content. And we broke it down. So the most common type was police violence. So it may be, police officers often wear body cams, or there's many cases where like the public is recording police violence. So we had a number of participants recount the deaths from ICE officers in the US, right? So like killing these innocent people. We had a high proportion of people telling us they've seen videos of like war. So they were mentioning the war in Ukraine, Iran, Gaza. But then they were also telling us about, we had 10% of teens telling us that they've seen authentic child sexual abuse material. 30% have seen animal torture and abuse. It was maybe about 13% have seen an adult getting sexually assaulted. So the spectrum of what they're seeing was really, really widespread. And that was a study we did in collaboration with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. They run the cyber tip line because they were getting more calls from people being like, my TikTok feed or my Instagram feed, like I'm just seeing this weird stuff. Like I'm
Mhm.
searching for sports or I'm searching for, like makeup tutorials. And then all of a sudden I see someone getting hit by a car. And then it goes back to the stuff that I like. And now I'm seeing someone getting shot. And they really just talked about how it was very weird that the stuff just shows up. And that's very much what we found in that survey was that they are not seeking this out. It just shows up in their feed, which means that this isn't a fluke. This is by design. The algorithms are designed to prioritize and circulate this kind of content because it's what we call sticky. You see it and
Mhm.
it kind of grips you. And again, it was very clear from the teens. It was overwhelming. They had negative responses. They don't want to be seeing this kind of content. They want more control over the kind of content that they're seeing in their feeds. But the algorithms and the platforms are recommending this content. This is something that you might find watchable or enjoyable or like something that you might share.
Mhm.
Not even because you like it, because you're like, whoa, like that was so crazy. That was so weird. I'll watch
Mhm.
it, I'll share it with other people. So those were some things that like we really did not expect the levels to be as high or the responses to be as high for the authentic gore and violence.
Yeah, just listen you talk about your findings from that survey. It's very shocking to see because I remember like myself and like other get into social media, you would get like the few like was it Coney 2012? Like there's a lot of
Yep.
big events that share, but I feel like teens these days are seeing more of that as you quote real violence inundated unwillingly, which is very interesting to hear. And I can't wait to see where this research goes in terms of legislation or just future studies of like or recommendations of like how social media platforms recommendations for them particularly. So mhm, thank you. I really want to shift gears a little bit about sextortion a little bit because from your webinar you kind of talked about there's differences between like financial sextortion, image-based sextortion. So I'm curious who is being targeted most and why? And can you walk me through the distinction of the financial versus the image-based
Yeah.
sextortion?
So again, like the biggest spike that around the world we're seeing, like kind of like law enforcement agencies and other these like public safety agencies coming forward, they're really raising the alarm about the rise of this financial sextortion that's targeting young boys and men. And again, I think and I'm not dismissing this. It's like the romance scams, right? So this is a tactic. The motivation is financial. They don't care about the targets. They don't care who they hurt, but it's very effective and successful. And in part because the message that we've constantly been telling people or young people is that once your image is out there, your life is over. So it's incredibly effective because we've been scaring children for so long. So yes, they're either going to comply and send the money, or they're going to engage in self-harm or have like very deteriorating mental health. Um, so and these gangs are very organized, again, especially for boys and young men. It's not to say that there aren't these one-off people who are doing it, but there are these communities of practice where groups are sharing scripts. And again, the tactics seem to be you find a Snapchat group or like an Instagram group of a high school or a sports team, you get in with one of them, and then you add all of their contacts and you message all of them. And so you kind of see, and again, like I said, when talking with boys and young men, like it was overwhelming how many of them have told us about attempts to sextort them or extort them. Like I knew that I was being catfished. Someone contacted me, like I knew that it wasn't real. So, if they contact like 1,000 people, and if even like 10 of them kind of like engage with it, it can be incredibly lucrative for some of these folks. So it's mass, like they're really like reaching very wide groups and with the hopes that like just a few of them will respond. When it comes to girls and women, again, it looks different. So in the context of like there's often a lot of grooming that goes on. So again, if it's like a stranger who find someone. Again, they find them very easily on Instagram and Snapchat. Um, they befriend them, they initiate romantic relationships, they make the person feel special. Adolescence is this time where we're developing, our sexuality, our identity. We want kind of that special sexual attention. And so when you have someone who is like love bombing you and making you feel good about yourself, it can be really easy, especially if maybe you are vulnerable or marginalized. Maybe you don't have that kind of like love or affection in your life. Or even if you do, even if you have lots of friends and if you have very supportive family, it can still feel really nice to have someone who's telling you how amazing you are and how much they love you. And often it comes with like buying them gifts. So like, let me send you things. I'll take you out. So they're really kind of being taken care of in a way that when we look at popular culture, some of their experiences actually mirror what we are told is like very romantic, like these grand gestures and having someone constantly, paying you attention. So it feels really good. So then they get into the case where, in many cases, they start to engage in sexual acts. Sometimes it's in person, sometimes it's completely virtual. Sometimes they know that they're being recorded, sometimes they don't. But that's when the extortion starts. And again, it can be very confusing for those circumstances because often people feel like they care about the person or love the person who's extorting them. They're told that this is what's normal in a relationship. It's normal for you to have sex with me or to send me these videos or images. So it can be very, very confusing for many of these people to even recognize that they're being groomed or extorted. They think that this is normal. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they absolutely know that they're
Mhm.
being extorted, but they've been told the message is that your life will be over.
Mhm.
I'm going to send these photos to your parents, to your grandparents, to your families, to your friend. And again, there's so much shame and stigma around having nudes leaked that many people are willing to just kind of continue in these relationships and continue to send these images. And then again, I mentioned in the webinar about for the queer community. Often we
Mhm.
know that this is linked with like homophobic bullying, outing, and there's particular concerns there. If you come from a very conservative group and where, maybe being gay is shunned, maybe in some parts of the world, maybe it's like still even illegal, right? So, or that your friends and family or your community will completely reject you if they find out this about you. It can be
Mhm.
it's a very easy lever for people to kind of hold over someone. So yeah, there isn't a one size fits all for what sextortion looks like.
Definitely. Thank you so much for talking about how sextortion can target anyone, but it can look different based on the certain context in which a person lives in. So, like their gender. Specifically, thank you talking about the 2S LGBTQ plus folks about they may face unique harms through sextortion as well. And
Absolutely.
I love that you're such a big driver and constantly debunking the idea that once your image is out, that your life is over, and that's not the case. That was one when we had our conversation about technology facilitates sexual violence, I think 7 months ago. It was so great to hear all the recommendations and resources you had, just because I didn't think there was many out there, but the fact that you were able to share on air, like your life is not over. These are all the people you can contact. It's just so wonderful to hear constantly.
Yeah,
Thank you
we
so
think
much.
that that's so important to remind young people and to remind the adults to stop telling that message to kids because you're hurting them. You're hurting them if that's all that they think about this. And again, let's face the reality. Let's think of how many people are using their tech as part of their romantic and sexual lives. So even if you don't send an intimate image until you're 18, chances are if you are in a romantic or sexual relationship at some point in your life, you're going to be sexting with someone. And so if someone violates your rights and share those images of you when you're 30, it's still a problem. So let's not be embarrassed. Let's recognize that, your rights are being violated. Your life will not be over. There are ways of getting these images taken down. Yeah, we really need to change the messaging.
Absolutely. And as one way, as you mentioned previously, the messaging of just telling parents that we have to change how we speak to your kids about this, your research found that teens are unlikely to report these harms to platforms or to their support people in their lives. Can you explain a little bit why that is. I can assume we have the answer around this conversation, but I'd love to hear more from your
Yeah.
perspective.
So many because of like the messaging that they've been gold. Like I'm definitely not going to go tell the person who's always told me only an idiot will send a nude that, oh gosh, mom and dad, I sent a nude because they're going to flip out. So we either hear that adults overreact or they underreact. So there was this line that we had from a teenager who was telling us about how they definitely wouldn't tell their mom because like she'll call the cavalry in. They might
Mm,
involve or the school, right? Like they're terrified. So of having their parents find out or having the police involved because maybe I just wanted to tell you so that you can provide me the emotional support and maybe help me figure out how to like minimize the damage, but I don't want this person to be prosecuted. I don't want them to get suspended. It's maybe someone that I care about. Maybe it's a peer, or maybe it's just like, my focus is just about kind of protecting myself. So we either hear that, yeah, schools overreact or they underreact, they dismiss it. And that also is not helpful for young people either. They want their experiences to be taken seriously. Oh, and they're also terrified of having their devices taken away. Again, I've been very outspoken about, I do think young people have digital rights. I do think that the tech can be like really important part of their social and emotional development. And maybe for a young person, if you take the phone away, but you don't actually address the underlying like issue of like, well, someone violated my rights and someone, breached my trust. And all you've now done is taken my phone away, and now I can't communicate with my friends who are providing me support. You're actually like, you're not solving the issue, you're furthering the harm. And what you're really doing is showing me that if something goes wrong again, I'm definitely not coming back to you. So, why being non-judgmental? Even though parents, I get it, you might in your head be like, oh my God, you're an idiot. That might be what you're thinking, but don't verbalize that to the young person. It's provide that empathy and like, I'm sorry that this happened to you. Let's figure this out together. We'll get through it. And I'm not, again, also saying to parents that like, I do think taking devices away can be an appropriate response, but I don't think it should be your initial knee-jerk reaction. And I think, you need to be addressing the underlying harm. And the other thing I often say to parents, and this is what I do with my own kids, is like we co-discuss the rules. So here are the rules for using this app or using this device. Here are the contexts in which you can use it. This is who you can communicate with. These are the kinds of things you can communicate about. And if my kids, I find that the iPad is in their bedroom when I said it could only be used on the main floor, yes, I'm taking that away. But it's something that we agree in the first place. So when we establish the rules and the boundaries in our household, we also talk about what the consequences will be if they breach those rules, and they help co-create them with me. So again, this is something that parents can do if you feel as though like, okay, there needs to be some accountability, which I think is like incredibly important.
mhm.
Um, it's something that maybe you can discuss with your child. Okay, so you experience sextortion. Well, let's like first deal with like the emotional response of like getting that sorted. And then now let's talk about like do you need to punish the young person for that? Again, like I don't want to tell parents how to like punish their own children, but I think that these are important conversations, and I think involving young people in like what are next steps is going to create a foundation for trust that will hopefully enable them to come back to you. If something goes wrong and not feeling like, well, gosh, like they just like totally overreacted or they made my life worse by the punishment.
Absolutely. I'm not a parent myself, so I cannot speak to the experience of parenting. I can only imagine that if it is a conversation that you have with a child, that it's your first thoughts are, holy shoot, like, what am I supposed to do? And I don't want to
Yeah.
deny that those are the first feelings you're going to bubble up. But just knowing that your child went to you for that emotional regulation to tell you something that is important and to kind of work together as a child parent dyad to solve a problem moving forward. So I'm giving, yeah, lots of support your way to any
Hmm.
parents that are listening
Hmm.
today that you can do it. You're
You
okay
can
to
do
have a
it.
little, the emotional regulation might have decreased a little bit. You might feel a little stressed during these conversations but you can definitely navigate these relationships and taking accountability and then also talking with your child or youth regarding the next steps going forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of want to shift gears just a little bit. I was absolutely like flabbergasted about the amount of AI deepfake tools that are now like maybe too accessible to the public. So deep fake nudes partly change the picture because the image doesn't have to be real anymore. It can be an AI generated image. Can you explain how that technology works in this context and where Canadian law currently stands regarding that?
Okay, that's a great question. So these apps are everywhere. Some of them are really easy to find, like we saw with Grok. I mean, it was actually like can be integrated into X. But many of these are just you find them on the App Store. And I will say, like many of them get uploaded and then removed because the public complains to like Apple and says, hang on a minute, like this app shouldn't be here. Which also suggests to me that there needs to be better gatekeeping on these like the app stores or the in the first place. But they're very, and even if they're not on the App Store, you can just like Google them and they show up. So again, that's something that, I've spoken with Google about you need to like not have them so prevalent in the search. But again, the way that some of them frame themselves is ha ha ha, this is just a joke, right? So maybe that's like a way that they're trying to kind of like go under the radar, that's what they're actually doing. Incredibly prevalent up until last month. It was legal for Canadian adults to deep nude and distribute those deep nudes of other adults. So we have this new piece of legislation, Protecting Victims Act, that has actually like made that as a criminal offense. So that is really important because we had a really upsetting case in Nova Scotia where there was someone who had deep nuded women and was not prosecuted because the existing legislation only recognized intimate images as those that were like authentic, not synthetic. So this new piece of legislation kind of covers that gap. Again, with children, there were some cases that where adults were prosecuted for distributing deep fake synthetic images of child sexual abuse material. So kids were always protected, but adults now also have protection in Canada. And then, like I say, within civil law, so if you want to sue someone, um, most provinces now have legislation that enables you to kind of seek compensation from someone who's deep nuding you. And again, like BC is often seen as like a really great place. They have the Civil Resolutions Tribunal where you can get a quick takedown. So they say, and actually we met with the head of the BC Civil Resolution Tribunal who was saying within 24 hours they can often get those images taken down, which is great because that's mostly what people want. They just want the images down and to be able to move on with their lives.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you for talking about what it is, deep nudes, as well as the legal ramifications and the expansion of Bill C-16 regarding that. Because I know that a lot of people feel like they have more agency now that the law now includes particularly
Yeah.
adult deep nude images.
Yeah, it was crazy before that it didn't. And I used to give this presentation and be like, adults can deep nude each other. And like the jaws would drop and be like, what? Like it just seems like most people really do support the legislation. So I'm really happy to see that it was passed.
Mhm. Moving forward, for maybe a parent or a teacher or community worker who wants to have this conversation with a youth, what approaches work and what are mistakes that maybe shut down young people when having this conversation?
So I think that there's no one right way to do it. And I think that this can't just be one big conversation. We need to have lots of different kind of conversations. So like I said in the webinar, I think sitting down face to face, like can feel really intense. So maybe the dinner table may not be the best place to do it, but maybe in the car when you're driving and be like, oh, like I heard this thing that happened the other day. Like, have you ever heard anything about this? Like, is this common? Is this something that you or your friends have ever experienced? So, I do think giving kids the opportunity to like role play and think through what you would do in this situation, or even just gauging their views on like, do you think there's anything wrong with it? Because I think that most young people aren't given the space to think it through. So my partner is an elementary school teacher, and he had a case this year at his school where one, I think it was like a grade six pupil, deep nuded another grade six pupil. And you're like, wow, like that's really young. Like that's really young for this to be happening. I don't want to criminalize that youth. Is it just that they didn't realize they weren't thinking about it? So, like, let's have conversations for young people to think through because, again, they might think that it's a joke. They might think I'm not hurting anyone, it's not real.
Mhm.
Or it may be like I'm sexually curious. I was curious about what they look like. They're not thinking through about how creating that deep nude is violating the other person's rights. So let's give young people opportunities to think about, you know, what are the ethics around doing this? Are there ever cases where it's okay to do it? How might it impact the other person if they found out? So let's just like have more of these conversations. Being too judgmental, like just telling young people what to think is probably not as effective as like getting them to think things through themselves. And what I actually love about studying this topic is like there are so many cases where these things are talked about in the media. So maybe it shows up in like a TV show where someone is like getting sextorted or non-consensual image sharing is like talked about. So it'd be like, oh wow, like I was watching this thing. Like, what do you think? Or watch if the program's appropriate, watch it together and talk to them about like what would you do? Or like what do you think that the characters did? Like, do you
Mhm.
think that that was right? So not making it about you and your child, but about like this is happening with other people can also be an effective strategy. And so just be curious, ask lots of questions, I think is also a really great strategy.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving some strategies, ones that might not be more effective than the other. And I just love that you kind of reference that youth are taking the lead on the conversation and allowing them to be curious, but also asking their thoughts and feelings regarding maybe more serious topics. So I really appreciate you talking more about that. And if maybe a young person is maybe experiencing sextortion or has had a deep fake image created of them now, what should they do? Is there some steps they should take?
Yes. Okay, great. So, sextortion. If you are experiencing sextortion, the first thing we really recommend is do not comply with the demands. We recommend deactivating, or so like screenshotting your account so that you, and the whole conversation. I know for some young people that might feel awkward, but don't just screenshot the bits where they're extorting you. Like start from the beginning and kind of like record it. Deactivate your account, but don't delete it. And that's particularly if you do want to pursue like criminal or like legal proceedings. And again, for that, it's important that you have the whole conversation and not just snippets of it. So that's really important. If you have a trusted adult, that you feel you can talk to and they're not going to just freak out and blame you, go to them. But if not, that's where the Kids Help phone line comes in. That's where Need Help Now comes in. That's where Cyber Tip comes in. So there are resources and places that young people can call or text or get the support from in Canada, in English and in French. And some of these places also have it in additional languages as well. So please like seek help. You can report it to the RCMP, if you do want to kind of go down criminal routes. Again, the chances of like finding the person or prosecuting the person are not high, but it may also just feel important to kind of have it recognized that this is your rights were being violated, that this was wrong. And hopefully they also direct you to kind of get the emotional support. And then if you know what the image is, which again, potentially you sent it to them, but again, maybe you were like having a live chat and you engaged in sexual acts and they recorded it secretly without you knowing. That sometimes happens. But if you know what the image is, I would hash it, register it with Project Arachnid so that it's just constantly scanning the internet and stopping it from being uploaded in real time.
Mhm. Thank you so much for giving all of that information. I'm going to put the resources such as the DIY that includes your projects and resources for teen parents, educators, Cyber Tip, Need Help Now, Project Arachnid. And then if you're over the age of 18, I will also add in stopnccii.org and Kids Help Phone in the show notes below. Thank you so much, Dr. Mendez, for joining me today. I truly appreciate it. Was there anything in this conversation we might have missed or anything that you would like to highlight at the end today?
I think you got it. The only thing I'll say is on our website, we actually have like three different sites that we recommend for people to use. And we also have like a what to expect when you contact them. So like If you contact Kids Help phone line, will they tell your parents? What are the languages that it's available in? How can you contact them? Because again, what we don't want is for young people to think like, if I contact this helpline, are they going to want to know my name? And that might actually make an impact for young people for like whether they contact that helpline or not. So that's just like an additional resource that can be helpful. And like if you work in a school or a community center, like having those kind of like infographics up so that young people can be like, aha, this is the helpline that I want to go to because they're not going to ask me for my name, or they're not going to try to get in touch with my parents, or I can contact this one in French, or I can text this one. I don't have to call.
Perfect. A highlight as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly
Okay,
appreciate
my
it.
pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on the HerHealth podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk. Remember, your health matters, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, remember to prioritize your health and well-being. For more resources and support on issues affecting girls, women, and gender-diverse people, visit our website at avatraining.ca. This is Dr. Nicole Letourneau. Thank you for listening.